Let me take a second here and tell you guys about Anchor. Anchor.fm is the podcast hosting platform that we actually used to launch this podcast, Hungry for Wisdom. If you want to start a podcast, you want to get some good doctrinal content out into the podcast space, which, look, we need a lot more of it, right? We would love for the world to be filled with gospel conversation. So you got something to contribute there, then you go over to Anchor.fm. You get it set up. It's free to use and really user-friendly, actually. We've been really happy with it. So you can make all your decisions and customize your settings up front. And then every time you upload an episode, boom, you're up on Spotify. You're up on Apple Podcasts. You're up on Stitcher. You're up anywhere you want to go. You want to monetize? Do it. You want to invite some audience feedback, some questions, some things like that? Do it. It's got all your metrics right there. You can figure out exactly what's going on behind the scenes on your podcast, and information is power, so you can continually improve it. So check out Anchor.fm to launch your podcast. Now, let's get back to this one and gain some wisdom. On today's episode of Hungry for Wisdom, mature content warning. Scratch that, it's flat out disturbing. Comforting sayings go rated R when you put them into action. And when Jesus said love your neighbor, he meant the one you think is icky. It's episode 18. Turn it up! Let me try that again. It's episode 18. Turn it up. Welcome to Hungry for Wisdom. This is the podcast for people who want to know what God knows. He hasn't told us everything, but man, he has told us a lot. I'm Dustin, pastor at Grace and Truth. If you want to know what God knows, let's dig in. And I continue on my personal crusade to see how many episodes in a row I can screw up the bumper music. So this makes a tight 18 because we're on episode 18, and I think I'm running a pretty unanimous streak. Today's episode is dedicated to somebody that we've dedicated a show to in the past, because some people I just want to keep in front of you guys all the time because they're doing great work. So Mirror Ministries, and we've got with us today the director of Mirror Ministries. Is that actually your title?
It is.
Director. All right, Tricia McFarland. Good to have you here. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I'm really happy to have you here. I've been wanting to do this ever since we started the podcast. I was thinking, man, there's such great people in town that you can, have a good conversation with, expose people to good ministries that are out there. And so I've been looking forward to getting you in here and just hitting record and seeing what happened. We didn't really talk a lot about where we're going to go with this. So I just want people to be aware of what you guys do, what the on-ramps are to help, what we need to be praying for, supporting, and all that kind of stuff. That being said, folks, this is a podcast devoted to the pursuit of wisdom, and we want to know what God knows, and he has made it all available to us by, not everything he knows, obviously, but everything he wants us to know, he's put in our hands, and most of that comes from the book of Proverbs. So let's dig into some of it.
Here we go.
And rather than doing a whole devotion through Proverbs, what I'm going to do is just read a couple, and then we're going to get down to some conversation with Tricia. So Proverbs 24, verses 11 and 12 give some foundational principles, at least in my mind. And Tricia, you'll have other bedrock scriptures for the kind of stuff that you do. But Proverbs 24, 11 and 12 comes to mind for me. Rescue those who are being taken away to death, and hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, behold, we did not know this, does not he who weighs the hearts perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? And will he not repay man according to his work? So that's quite a stern warning there. If you know that somebody is hurting, and you know that somebody is stumbling towards the slaughter, and you do nothing, the blood's on your hands, right? He says this to Ezekiel and so on. Also, Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9, we see this. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Good stuff to say. Sounds nice. It's hard stuff to do, though, right? So when you put God's commands into action, even the ones that sound comforting and they sound like yeah, morally, like I can get behind that. Man, sometimes that's gritty work, isn't it? It
is. It's down and dirty stuff. But it is what he calls us to do.
Indeed. And he empowers the process. So I've been really excited over the years to see how God has put you guys into action and just the sort of stuff that he's done through you. So why don't you just give us a quick rundown of what Mirror Ministries is all about?
Absolutely. So our mission is to respond to domestic minor sex trafficking with the love of Christ through local education, intervention, restoration, and aftercare. And our vision in that is to see local victims of sex trafficking become survivors who have that hope, healing, and restoration. We are a Christian organization. What we do is because of Christ, through Christ, with Christ. But we serve anyone and everyone that has been commercially sexually exploited and went like out of that life. That means we're dealing with folks of all walks of life. Literally, there's no socioeconomic norm in sex trafficking. You have people from every age demographic, every background you can imagine. It's not just the poor. It's not the rich or the highly educated are not excluded from this. So we deal with all kinds of things, but we also deal with, because of the extreme trauma, if you can imagine the trauma that comes along with the betrayal of those who you're supposed to be able to trust, and the serial rape, really, and other abuses and tortures that happen to these folks that are being trafficked. The trauma that's there also, then you got to deal with that somehow. So many people start self-medicating because of the things they're going through. So you end up with addictions, whether those drugs were first forced on them or they were using them for self-medication to deal with all of that trauma. You're now dealing with a lot of mental health issues and addictions to be able to move forward. Those are things that they're doing to be able to survive, right? You got to do something to be able to keep going each day and live. But those survival techniques are also the things that keep them from really thriving and surviving. When you're trained to not trust anybody and not talk to anybody about what's going on or else, it's hard to get help.
Well, and it's hard for some people to look past the symptoms, because we look at, let's say a young lady who is addicted and we say, oh, she's an addict, she must have this set of problems, not realizing what you just said, that the addiction is a symptom of the deeper things going on that she actually needs addressed for survival reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. Most people, I really haven't met anybody that said, "Oh, gee, I'd love to be a meth addict. Yeah. Maybe I should start trying meth."
Right.
There's some underlying cause. Almost always, maybe somebody just dabbled in it and it caught them, but almost always there's some underlying condition. And for the folks we're working with, that tends to be a betrayal from family members or boyfriends or whoever that might be. That was supposed to be someone who protected and loved them, and yet they're the ones that are forcing them to do horrible things with other people. So
we'll get more into the work you guys do and how you do it, but give me a bit of a rundown just of how you got started doing this whole thing, because I'm guessing that you could say the same thing about yourself as you did about the meth addict. You didn't wake up one day and be like, you know what, I'd really like to just jump into the bottom of life with everybody and spend all my full time there. So how'd you get involved in this whole, did you start Mirror Ministries? How did you get involved in this whole subject? What happened?
Yeah, good question. Those Proverbs that you just read, the first one about, once you know, you can't, you can't say you don't know. William Wilberforce has a quote that now I'm thinking really he probably just stole that from the Proverbs, but he was a good guy.
That's what all the smart guys do. They just plagiarize from Solomon.
Plagiarize from the wisest. Yeah. So, there's nothing new under the sun. I started where most people start with sex trafficking, looking across the ocean, right? In Cambodia, where it's horrible. There's horrible things going on there. Went over to Cambodia and came back to the Tri-Cities. I had been volunteering down at Union Gospel Mission, and those gals were real excited to hear about my trip. And when I explained to them the horrors of what we saw, how evil it was, little kids were being used, taken off the streets, used and tossed back out on the streets again. And the ladies from the Union Gospel Mission just looked at me and said, Miss Trish, that's happening right here. And I said, no, you misunderstand me.
The ladies that were working there?
The ladies that come in each week. Okay. So
they're out on the streets seeing it.
Oh yeah. They live in the community and they know what was going on. And it was just a stab in the gut. And I thought, how could this be happening in my own community? And I didn't know it. So we started looking around and asking God again, what are you doing? Where are you at? How can we help?
And he's like laughing. He's like, oh, I got plans. Don't you worry.
So here we are a few years later. So I'm one of the co-founders of Mirror Ministries. We started with a ministry out of our church at the time, and we started Sold the Human Trafficking Experience, which is being torn apart at this point. Yeah. But it had a good run. It was a walkthrough audio-led experience where people learned about different kinds of trafficking. But that led to people calling us and saying, hey, we've met up with this trafficking victim, or I've been being trafficked and I need some help. And there just weren't resources here in the Tri-Cities. Mm-hmm. So God started showing us where the holes were and how we could fill in. And we started connecting and building bridges with other agencies and organizations throughout the Tri-Cities, and we're here to stand in that gap.
Yeah, the nonprofit world in the Tri-Cities and the charity world and all of this, it's actually pretty robust. Like it's, a lot of it's under the surface. Like, I mean, you guys don't even have a sign where you are, and for good reason, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of that once you get into, hey, we want to help certain things in the community. You find that even in a relatively small community like this, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things that you can kind of lock arms with. So you guys got to form some of those early alliances, and that was helpful for you?
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of those agencies being able to work together really well, which is good because that wasn't always the case. But where we're all trying to help the same types of issues or different parts of the puzzle, how important is that we can all work together and make sure, right? Not one of us can solve every bit of the issue for every person out there, but all working together, every church working together, every agency working together, we can make a real big difference for our community and each individual person that's really needing to answer that call that they're hearing from the Lord.
Yeah. So let's get into the problem here that the Gallup Union Gospel Mission was telling you about, because a lot of people probably wouldn't associate Tri-Cities with a sex trafficking problem. We're not a port city. We're not like Portland, Atlanta, Seattle. I mean, these are the big players, right?
Right.
But there's a lot to keep you busy in Tri-Cities. So what's the problem look like on the ground? Why is there so much going on here?
Yeah. So a lot of people think of trafficking and smuggling in the same context, which it is something different, right? Smuggling is transporting over a border things illegally, whether that's humans or drugs or whatever. Some of that happens with trafficking, but what we're seeing here in the Tri-Cities, at least at Mirror Ministries, we're seeing almost all of the clients we work with are born, raised, bought, and sold here in the Tri-Cities.
Really?
So it's locally grown issues that we're dealing with. We do have we are part of circuits that go around too. So there are trafficking circuits where they will move girls or boys from different areas, Seattle, Spokane, Portland. We are on some major highway intersections there. So there is some of that as well.
Yeah, 84 comes through here, 182 comes through here. So yeah, the Tri-Cities is kind of a big stop from like Seattle to Boise or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, we wind up being a hub.
Yes.
And I've heard things also about, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the boat races every summer, right? I mean, they'll bus, prostitutes. Yeah. But like, I don't want to make it sound like they're all willing, right? Like they'll do, they'll force kidnapped sex traffic workers to come in for the boat races because the demand is there because everybody's running around, and a lot of guys are drunk and just, looking to satisfy whatever. And so they're actually busting them in for certain events locally, right?
Same thing everywhere. You have things going on for the Olympics. You have things going on for Super Bowl. Anytime you have a lot of partying, even our Democratic or Republican conventions, both parties are as guilty as one another.
I had heard that at one point that the worst times in America throughout the calendar year for whether it's any kind of sex trafficking or abuse or, in this vein or whatever, is the Super Bowl in whatever city the Super Bowl's in. And then Washington, D.C. whenever Congress is in session.
Yeah, that's just a lot of testosterone going through.
Yeah.
No matter what.
It's easy to look at the congressman and say, oh, you bunch of perverts. And that's probably true in a lot of cases. But, every now and then one of them gets busted. But they got a lot of staff. And there's a lot of, there's a whole industry around this, right? So,
well, and we're talking about the exploitation of vulnerable people by people with power. So when you look at those kinds of things, that's why we see those high standing people get arrested, because that power goes to your head, and unfortunately you start exploiting more and more.
It's Galatians 5, right? Anything that is led by the flesh, it's going to end up in the same way. Like if you're led by the flesh, you end up doing this kind of stuff, and like orgies are on the list and all kinds of sexual immorality. And if you're led by the Spirit, you have the fruit of the Spirit. But yeah, it's pretty predictable. You get money, you get power, you get fallen humanity, you get sex trafficking.
I do want to go back to one other thing you said. You were talking about how I heard it was the difference of prostitution and sex trafficking.
Yes.
And that's part of the trainings we do too, especially right now where there's a big push for legalizing prostitution. They will say, it's just a form of work, and a woman has a right to her own body and can do these kinds of things. We disagree with that. And also studies will show too, if you do actually research some of that, look at the Nordic model, etc., where they have legalized prostitution, sex trafficking increases, violence increases, murder increases. It it legitimizes to the buyers what they're doing. So
it gives permission for a lot of stuff. Yeah.
It gives permission, what they already feel they have permission because they've paid for something. But when we talked about, the addict didn't necessarily say, hey, I want to be a meth addict. We have yet to come up, because we'll work with anybody who's been commercially sexually exploited. So that includes somebody who's prostituting themselves. If they want out of the life, we'll work with them as well. But we have yet to, in our 7-8 years of doing this as Mere Ministries, we have yet to meet someone who has been prostituted, who is prostituting themselves, who really willingly is doing that. It's a matter of lack of choices, not really a matter of choice. So they say it's by choice. When you start talking to them, they really don't feel like they have any other choices.
So the coercion may not be from like a man in their life all the time. The coercion may just be from circumstances,
past circumstances, etc.
Okay.
I mean, you have kiddos, right? Yep. And we've all asked that little 5-year-old girl, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? How many of those answers have ever been, I want to be a prostitute?
Yeah, none.
It's not an option that we think of. Because it's not. It's an exploitation. That's not something you dream of being. It's something that it's an abuse that happens to someone.
So not all, to get terminology straight here, not all prostitutes are being sex trafficked, but all prostitutes, you would, from your experience, it sounds like, are in the same kind of need of the same kind of, help, services, intervention, whatever. Am I saying this right?
I think so. Legally, the difference is for an adult, it's force, fraud, or coercion is compelling them into the sex trade.
Okay. And then if it's a minor, it's just always coercion. If it's a minor,
anyone under 18 involved in a commercial sex act, commercial being something exchanged for value, is always sex trafficking. Yeah. Anyone under the age of 18, and that's nationwide.
They're not able to legally consent.
Right. Yeah, just like they're not able to legally buy vapes or cigarettes or alcohol or a rental car.
And so that's important too. You said anything. So commercial is anything you're exchanging something for value. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that money is changing hands for a sex act. It could be, anything. It could be a car. It could be, a watch. It could be a meal.
It could be a McDonald's burger, which, one of the gals that we work with talks about when she was a homeless teen, she'd been extremely abused at home. She ran away. She was starving. She was cold. She was sitting outside McDonald's with a sign, and this nice man bought her a meal and brought her to his car and then expected payment for that.
And this is common in Tri-Cities.
Yeah.
Our backyard.
Yeah. Nobody should ever be expected to give payment of that sort for a meal, especially a child, but even an adult. So anytime someone is paying for sexual favors, there's exploitation. That person obviously isn't wanting to do that with you if you're having to pay them. And when we look at things like pornography, it's can even be that commercial value can even be the fact that they're trading different videos or pictures. And
so is because I help get a lot of guys off of porn. It's like, it's a thing I love to do. Some people, go watch football. Some people listen to music. I get guys off of porn. It's like a hobby, right?
Thank you very much.
So it really is great to see that level of freedom on the men's end of things, or the man's end of things, when he gets freed from that. But that doesn't fix the problem of the pornography industry that he was feeding on. Right. And so one of the things that I'll tell these guys is that there's a massive, massive problem with coercion with the porn actresses. And I mean, sometimes actors, but generally speaking, we're talking about the actresses. And so is that, do we know if that's happening a lot in Tri-Cities as far as the filming industry? I mean, are girls getting kidnapped or sold into the pornographic industry in Tri-Cities, or is that more of an out there sort of thing? Do we know?
And to quantify the kidnapped portion too is kind of a Hollywood version of, there is some kidnapping for sex trafficking, but most of these folks that are being sex trafficked are still living here in the Tri-Cities, still living at home, still going to school, and still being forced to do these kinds of things. The pornography industry, I do know that our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force here in the Tri-Cities, there's only 2 in the state, 1 in King County and 1 here in Benton, Franklin County.
Wow.
They are constantly busy.
They don't have one in Spokane?
No, just two task force, and we've got one of them. They're constantly busy. It's a nonstop, horrible thing. If you want to be praying for some folks, pray for those frontline law enforcement that have to watch endlessly for detail on these videos in order to prosecute and rescue kids. It's a horrible, horrible bunch of demons that they have to deal with on a daily basis. So do keep them in your prayers. So it's a pretty prominent industry here, even in the Tri-Cities. One of the largest cases ever, the first biggest case internationally was out of Kennewick with a man who was trafficking doing videos of his daughter. And then we've had, just recently in the last year, we've had so many cases pop up and so many huge ones. Yeah,
well, there was that big one that got I forget how many it was, but 15 or 20 guys, and some of them were, school board officials. I mean, I forget what all the details were, but what was that, 4 or 5 years ago? And there were some prominent figures in the community that got
yeah, you're talking about
there.
the net nanny sting, and then the school district gentleman. I always tell my folks, you don't need to use the word gentleman. Sometimes it's sometimes that's not the right word. The man from the school district, the fella, he was separate from the net nanny sting, but he had been soliciting young girls as well.
Okay.
And it's hard when it's prominent people like that, because victims will come forward and nobody will listen to them, because they'll say, "Oh, he's a good guy. He's the superintendent of the school district. What are you talking about? He writes children's books. He supports little girls. He even has several little girls that he texts back and forth with all the time."
Yeah.
Yeah, he does.
And that didn't put up a red flag?
Yeah, it didn't at the time.
Right.
Now it might more so for folks, but it's so hard when victims step forward and people don't believe them. So that's something I would encourage you is have open conversations with your family members about, we call them tricky people. There's information on our website about tricky people conversations too.
That's something I wanted to get into with you is protection mechanisms and prevention and training and things like that. But
most of it's being aware and understanding what some of that grooming process looks like, and then having that as an open conversation. So if your kid is having, the neighbor down the street is being tricky, for lack of a better word right now, they're going to come to you and talk to you because it's normal conversation you've already been having on a daily basis. Where otherwise the first thing that an abuser is going to do is tell them not to tell anyone. Yeah. Right. It's either because it's our little secret and we're special, or because I will give threats, pretty severe threats that are, especially to a child, really terrifying. But really, we're all vulnerable. So
and to go back to that issue of prominent members in the community and so on, it's one of the tricky things there is that in some positions, accusations are so normal. For example, in the foster care industry, right?
Yeah.
Industry. In the foster care world, if you're a foster parent, they tell you, look, at some point, some kid's going to accuse you of touching them. That's just what's going to happen. Because for some of these kids in survival mode, that's their first line of defense.
They know they can get a reaction that way. Yeah.
Right. And so it's just have all your ducks in a row and you're going to get accused. And so the more visibility, the more eyeballs are on you in the community, the more likelihood there is for somebody to accuse you, which means that the average credibility of the accusation goes down because it's more expected. So that's one of the tricky things there is if you go up against somebody with power, somebody or a community voted or decided to give them that power, and they don't want to admit that they're wrong.
Right. That's true.
That's really tricky. And even it's a small sample size, but even as a pastor, part of my job is to say things that make people mad, right?
Yeah.
Because you fight sin, it fights back. It's not always pleasant stuff. And we all just know, hey, rumors are going to get spread. It's going to happen. And so, it's such a tricky thing because you don't ever want to discount an accusation. And yet, and I know I'm off track a little bit, but this is so important in the world we live in. It's also important to vet accusations, right? That whole thing with the Me Too movement that happened a few years ago where there was a push to believe all women. And I was really glad to see the immediate hesitancy for that. Whoa, hold on a second. You can't just sacrifice a dude's life and reputation and stuff without asking questions. Due diligence is right? You have to do that. So how do you, and maybe there's no answer to this, but how do you go about that investigation when there's an accusation against somebody, let's say somebody who's a public figure or something? You go about that investigation, but doing so in a way that doesn't demonize the accuser because he or she might be right.
Right. Well, first you're not gonna start by telling everybody in the community, right? You're going to start by believing the person who's coming and talking to you, giving them the right ears to hear their story. So don't just, you don't have to just sit and listen to all the details if you're not the authority figure that's going to be able to do something about it. But making sure that they know that they have somebody to talk to. Most women will not report rape. And
Yeah, what's up with that anyway? I mean,
it's what you just exactly what you just said, right?
It's
I
so
hard.
It's
so hard to prove, and then you have to the rape victim, when they're interviewed by authorities for reasons, right? If they're gonna go to court, they're gonna deal with this cross examination. Mm-hmm. So I brought a woman in to do a rape report, and I was sick to my stomach as they were asking her questions, because it was all about what she did, not what he did to her.
You mean like the questions? I mean, the way it sounds like the questions almost got a little accusatory. Like, did you invite this?
Not a little, yeah. It was
okay.
It was very accusatory, and they said, "Well, we have to ask it this way because this is what happens in court." I mean, I know some young friends that it was somebody from work, and they were intimidated and afraid to say anything to other people in the workplace. So they ended up quitting and moving to another job. And,
wow.
So then that just empowers that guy again, right?
Yeah.
To do it again and again.
And the way I've seen that happen where it made a lot of sense to me, even right up front, was, I mean, what you're saying makes sense, but that's a mind bender for me that you would not report something like that. That explanation helps. I get it if it's like somebody in-house that you got to go home to, if it's the dad or it's the big brother or something like that. And that happens a lot. I was talking to I suppose I won't say on recording who I was talking to, but there was somebody in a sleepy town who was, on the police force. And I asked him, like, hey, do you have enough to do around here? This is a pretty boring town. And he said, oh yeah, we stay busy. And I said, like, with what? Like guys running red lights? What is there to do around here? Somebody left the toilet seat up and it was bad manners. I mean, what does a cop do in this city? And he said, the number one call that we get is domestic sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? He said, oh yeah, we see it all the time. And it was just normal in what would look like a pretty buttoned up community, but he got, and he made that same comment. He said, we get this call a lot, but we're only seeing a small fraction of it. And if we're hearing about X amount,
right,
we know that it's a factor of 10, 20, whatever he said, that it's
you have to
happening.
look up the stats, but I feel like it's 60 to 80% or more do not report.
Wow. And now is that different, boys versus girls? Like
though it's even harder for boys. Boys who've been raped are less likely to report than girls. Yeah. And that's a pretty high percentage. So, but for a male, you're supposed to be the tough guy, right? Mm-hmm. Not the victim. Mm-hmm. So claiming you're a victim, is a rough thing as a male to do. Yeah. Also, the male anatomy is wired to respond to stimulus. And the abusers use that against them, saying, "See, it's you're making me do it. You want it. You're making me do it." And so their own body betrays them as much as the abuser does.
Wow,
that's a tough thing to deal with.
Yeah.
And so when you see those meth addicts laying out on the street out there, it's very likely that that's their backstory. Mm-hmm. At least I know quite a few of them that we know. That's their backstory.
Well, and we talk about this a lot in various subjects on this podcast, where the physical and the mental and the spiritual are all very much intertwined, right? Mm-hmm. So the physical abuse is really primarily, I mean, the physical side of things and the injury and the damage, that heals in a relatively short amount of time in most cases. But then you've got the mental side of things and the psychological damage, which is
and
like,
the spiritual damage.
And the spiritual damage is like, to what degree did I participate in that? To what degree did I actually invite that? What's going on in my subconscious? And the abuser's long gone. They don't have to see any of this, or they're still around and they don't care.
Right.
And that's the deeper levels of stuff that's going on by the time you guys are engaging the problem.
Exactly. So that's a big part of what we do. Is it's not just the outreach. We do purposeful outreach. We run a 24/7 hotline. But it's that therapeutic care afterwards, because we are made in the image of a triune God. And so we do have that body, mind, and soul. If we're not taking care of all three of those pieces, something's always missing.
Yep.
So being able to reach out and love on people, body, mind, and soul, making sure that they have those basic necessities met, that they have a place of safety, and that they have that emotional and mental health healing, and that they know that they can talk about Jesus. And without his forgiveness, his grace, and his mercy, there's just no healing for any of us. Yeah.
So let's get into how you do it then. So there have been quite a few times where, I've come up against a situation where I'm like, this looks like trafficking to me. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've called you and you've said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And there have been a couple of times where you or somebody at Mirror Ministries has just come over and met the young lady. And in fact, well, I'll just, it's been long enough now. I can probably tell this, some of the details of this story. Young lady comes into my office. She was maybe 17, 18, and she said that her brother had raped her and she's pregnant. And because she's pregnant, her dad kicked her out of the house because it was shameful to the family. Right. And so I'm sitting here like,
once again, this is why women don't report these things.
Yeah. So, and she wasn't a Christian. She was a member of another religion, but she walked into a church, right? She didn't know where to go, clearly.
Because she knows God. She knows God in her heart and soul, even though she may not know him yet in her mind.
Yeah. And she knew that her dad's God wasn't it.
Yeah.
Right. So, she walks in and I'm, of course I'm thinking, can I have your dad's phone number and address and place of business, please? And like license plate number. I go into that mode, right? But it's like, that's the wrong thing to do. So I called you guys and, I said, okay, how do I proceed? Because I can only do, I can't drive her anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. What am I going to do? And I was here alone and stuff like that. So, I think I talked to you, you sent somebody else down and they picked her up and basically dealt with it from there. And I wasn't privy to what happened after that, which is good because there's confidentiality involved. Right. And so she was in a safe place. So in a situation like that, what happens from the time that you guys pick her up? How do you minister to somebody in that situation? Yeah.
So first we're going to ask, who are the safe people in your life? Who, is there anyone that you can trust? Someplace you can go. So we have, I should back that up. The very first is we're going to make sure, do you need a bottle of water? We're going to actually recommend, we go to that physical first, that, hierarchy of needs, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to take care of the physical first. Here's a snack. Here's a bottle of water. Let's make sure you physically can function because the trauma forces all those physical things even worse.
Well, and I'm sure in a lot of these cases, it's been a while since these guys have had, a decent meal. There's no nutrients in their system.
Yeah. So making sure you don't pass out on us. And then that safety planning. If it's been a recent sexual encounter or rape, we'll encourage them, not force them. You can't force anybody to do these things, but encourage them to go do a rape kit at the hospital. We'll go with them and we'll stay with them throughout that. We'll encourage them to make a police report. Once again, the vast majority of them, even sex trafficking victims, are not going to report.
There's a lot of blowback.
There's a lot, and there's a lot of threats, and there's a lot of, if it's familial trafficking, if it's family members that are doing it, then, you're in trouble there. Girls report, uncle is doing this to me, and suddenly they're in trouble because they've destroyed the whole family. If it's gang trafficking, you don't tell on other gang members, so many different reasons for that. Then we'll look for that safety. Where are we going to be able to stay? Because right now there isn't a restoration home in the Tri-Cities for sex trafficking victims. So we partner with the different agencies around the community, or if they have family members or friends that they can stay with, that it's safe. If need be, we'll drive them out of the community into another safe location, even that evening, depending on what time and what their needs are. If they need to detox, that's another thing we have to go outside of Tri-Cities for right now. There's no detox facilities. Got to go to
Yakima for that one, right?
Mm-hmm. Or other, even further. We'll find that safety. Once they're safe, they're established, then we just start working on what are your dreams? Because when they first start with us, the goal is simply survival, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. That you can't think past that. Once they start getting that stability and some time to calm and heal, then they start talking about, I'd really like to finish school. I'd really like to, get my beautician's certificate.
I don't know how that whole
whatever
industry
that
works.
is. Yeah. I'd really like to, there's whatever their goal happens to be. So it's really awesome when we see them come to know the Lord, when we see them. Actually, what's really cool is so many of them actually know him in a really different way coming in, even the ones who've been abused in his name and in the name of the church, which is a really, really rough one to watch and see because, the betrayal, right? You're using Jesus against them.
You talk about a power differential. I mean, when somebody says that they are representing God, and you have to, well, actually, and we just saw this. So you and I have seen this on firsthand, and I don't mean like witnessing the actual rape happening, but we've interacted with these situations before. But that's because that's the world that we're in, right? But the whole world just saw this with the Ravi Zacharias thing, where he was telling these girls at the massage parlors that he apparently was floating with ministry money. I don't know. That got really crazy. But he was telling the girls, I serve the Lord a lot and you are my reward. What is she supposed to say to that, right? I mean, that is dark stuff. And this, man.
So we're very careful the way we share the gospel because of that. We still share it,
Yep,
but we're
yep.
careful how and the wording and etc.
Right,
But it
because if
is
you say the
astounding to me.
same thing that
Right.
their abusive pastor said to them, and a lot of those platitudes, that's what,
Yeah.
you could go back to that well again, and it's just going to trigger that. So
Exactly. But it's amazing how many of them know Jesus. And I say, how is it that you know and love and trust Jesus when you were told that, this is why this is happening to you? And they said, no, that wasn't Jesus that they were talking about. Jesus was the one that was behind the couch with me and holding me and telling me it was going to be okay. Jesus was the one that came and sat with me. Jesus was the one who was across the room crying when they were abusing me. They knew Jesus because he had come to them, and they could discern the difference between what the abusers were calling God and who God really was. Now, do they know the details and the depths of their faith? That's what they get to kind of come and explore a lot more. But they know him, and they know that there's a difference between that false God that was being used against them and Jesus who came and comforted them.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here for a second. The one of the questions that I get a lot as a pastor is, if God sees this stuff and doesn't stop it, why? Right? So, I've got my pastoral answers for that kind of stuff, but they are of limited helpfulness sometimes because they're book answers. That's what I've got in this situation. I've got book answers. Doesn't mean they're incorrect. It just means, but what's the deeper level look like? So these girls then, mostly girls, I assume, that have said these kinds of things to you, that know Jesus in that way, from that experiential standpoint, how would they answer a question like that? Yeah. Hey, why didn't God stop it? If he was there with you, why didn't he stop it? What would they say?
Yeah. We live in a broken and evil world, and there's broken and evil people. And really, broken people, is really a bigger one. There are some I've met that are just plumb evil too, but I think that mostly comes from a brokenness most of the time also. But they would say we live in a broken and evil world, and there's people who just are going to hurt other people. God is a good and gracious God. But if he told us and forced us to do what we should do all the time, we would have no free will. So, do we really want, kind of like the political situations we look at all the time too, right? Do you really want to lose all of your freedoms in order to have your safety? Do you really want to lose all of your free will in order to have a perfect world? Well, it's a perfect world, but only if you live within the script exactly what you're supposed to do every moment.
Yeah, and that's a much more salient point coming from somebody whose core desire is to be free, who has been oppressed, right? I mean, if I say that, well, yeah, if God forced us to do everything, where would your free will be? That's a point of theological minutia,
right?
But when that comes from somebody who has been enslaved or entrapped or abused or whatever, and all they want is to be free from that, and then they say, yeah, but God desires our freedom, same way I do, right? That's a much that's a much better answer.
I hear them say, he or she was not listening to God, but God was there with me.
Interesting.
So they knew his presence. They knew he was there the whole time, and they saw him weeping. That's the other part. It just makes me cry every time too. But it's not just that Jesus was there in the room. Jesus was there and weeping. So.
Yeah. You've been in some of these rooms and heard some of these conversations that are life-changing for people. And what do you think would be some of the big takeaways that you just wish everybody could know, right? Because not everybody's going to be in those situations, right? But if you've got an audience right now of, I'm sure at least 6 people listening to this podcast, that
hello, every one of you.
Yeah. That, we want them all to know something about the people that are being abused, to be able to hear their voices in some sense. What does everybody need to know that these young girls are screaming that they need to have heard?
Somebody see me. Somebody listen to me. And then don't just turn away because it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. But it's okay. We're all Imago Dei, right? We're all made in the image of God. And to be able to see the beauty in the brokenness. There's that Japanese art where they take broken pottery and melt it together with the gold. Have you seen that
Yep,
before?
yep.
And make something even more beautiful.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, we serve a God who refines the gold in the fire, and they've been through a lot of fire, but that refinement process brings out even bigger beauty. So, don't be afraid to look at that girl who's sitting outside of Walmart with a cardboard sign. Don't be afraid to say hello to that young man who's out there. Yeah, there's a lot of scams going on. You don't have to give everybody money, but you could talk. You can treat them with humanity and respect. And you could start conversations and have real, actual human relationships with people. Put your phones down and start looking at the people around you and paying attention. They would also say, where were you when I was little, or where were you when I was hurting? So when you see something that seems out of place, unusual, wrong, speak up and say something. Ask questions. Get in there and get personal a little bit. Be polite. Don't be, the loud mouthed, shouting things on social media. Just be personal and relational with people. Yeah. And step up and do something. So when we look at who's being trafficked, kids that have been rescued nationwide, nearly 80% of those kids have been part of the foster care system. If you want to do something to stop trafficking and prevent this kind of stuff, get involved. Be a foster parent. Better yet, get involved. Help families not fall apart. Help families, help people be good parents, so we don't have that falling apart to begin with. So mentor young couples, mentor young parents. Be a foster parent, support foster parents, support foster kids, be a mentor for kids, get involved in different agencies, and learn the signs of trafficking, learn the signs of grooming that leads to trafficking, so that you can educate and invest with other people around you as well.
Yeah, it's hard to traffic somebody with a good support network, right?
It's hard, but it's not impossible. What we're seeing, especially since COVID started, is a huge increase of online grooming and trafficking. They're catching kids in good Christian homeschool families, and they're sitting there, doing their work on their computer, and somebody is building a relationship or starting in with threats. It can go either way, whether it's a bullying kind of situation or a relationship situation. And they catch those vulnerabilities quick, and they will manipulate those kids very easily. So, but if the kids are aware of what those manipulations look like and what those tricky people are like, then we can, they're more likely to come to you because they already know what it is that, might be going on. So,
yeah. Well, and we've seen two of those situations in the church where parents caught it. And they said, it was on their kids' devices, and they said, "Whoa, what's going on here?" and turned it into the authorities and whatever. And so, it's like if we caught two of them, I mean, I say we, I didn't do anything, but if I know two people here that caught two of them, how much more of that's going on, right?
Exactly.
So you guys have some way of not just receiving calls, like when somebody like me calls you and says, "Hey, I think we got a trafficking situation." You're proactive in being able to go and reach out to people to see if they need to be rescued out of a situation. I've heard things about you putting bars of soap in motel bathrooms and things like that. I know there's some kind of online thing that you do where there's a combing for phone numbers, or how does all of that work?
Yeah. So it's an online bot system, they call it. So like a robot, I guess, and it scrapes the ads. So we don't have to look at all the nasty, icky stuff out there, but we get the phone numbers, and there's literally thousands of ads on just a few sites that they scrape for us. Here in the Tri-Cities for people being sold for sexual services. Now that's people of all ages, all backgrounds, but once again, we'll work and help with anybody. They can't advertise that it's a child because there's words that they use for the purchasers to know what it is, but it's not going to be blatant on there. So we send text messages to those phones because typically the trafficking victim has to be the one that's their own marketer. Basically, they have to do the back and forth on the phone situation. So when they know they're safe and they're ready and willing, they can answer back on those messages and know that there's somebody who cares out there. We also do street outreach. We go to the skate parks and down by the river and stuff, and look for those who are wandering aimlessly or just at higher risk. And then we work with different agencies, schools, any foster agencies or groups that we can get into to reach that higher risk population. Right now, our clients that we work with, the survivors we work with are ranging in age from 6 to 63. But our focus really is domestic minor sex trafficking victims. What we found is God has been sending us, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 60-year-olds. Almost every single one of them was first commercially exploited as a child. So they just never found that help before that.
And that's one of the things that you told me once that blew my mind was that, you kind of, these are my words, not yours, but you kind of destroyed my image of the general sex trafficking situation as, you've got a pimp in a big fluffy coat with a cane who's kidnapping girls and then selling them. And you said, nah, dude, this is their cousins. Or, they're growing up in the gang life or whatever.
Yeah.
And these are people that they know that are betraying them. And then they come back and it's just like this repeated process. It's a much more familial thing, which is a weird word to use in a context like this. But yeah, the industry is more related to bloodlines than typical economic transactions.
Yeah. Most of our clients up until this last couple of years where we've seen more and more of the online grooming of the kids, most of our clients, their first trafficker was their mother. Their mom between the ages of 3 to 7. And she would start sending men down to her room. And what kind of betrayal is that? That's the person who's supposed to love you and care for you and protect you.
And do you find that that's usually a multi-generational thing where the mom was raised in that as well, or?
Either multi-generational, sometimes just pure depravity, and very often drugs. When somebody gets, and that also goes with that multi-generational too, right? If they've been exploited and have that damage, then they're going to be more likely on those drugs. But those drugs will make people do things that they never would have ever imagined to do before.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, addiction is crazy because it takes you out of control of yourself, right? It makes your decisions for you in a lot of ways. So I read a couple of scriptures up front, but what are the bedrock scriptures that kind of drive Mirror Ministries in the sense of you guys are doing this because God has said some stuff, right? God wants to see some things happen. So what, I think in a good ministry, the voice of God is the loudest one in the room at all times. So and I've been in the meetings and working on the projects and whatever with Mirror Ministries and prayed with you guys. I know you guys are listening to the Lord. What's some of the stuff that he says from the scriptures just repeatedly? What are some of the driving forces that keep you guys going in the dark work that you're doing?
Micah 6:8, right? Walk humbly, love mercy, do justice. And in the New Testament, in the Gospels, now I'm going to forget all my places. Sorry.
I'll see if I can back you up here. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Jesus comes into the temple and he picks up the scroll of Isaiah, and, it's his turn. He picks the scroll and he picks this place to read. You got the scripture for me?
Yeah. So Luke 4:17, the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and he found the place where it was written. She's quoting Isaiah 61 here. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, or the year of the Lord's favor in this translation.
And then that was the first mic drop. He dropped the mic.
The next verse. And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down.
Dropped the mic. He said, this is what I'm here for, guys. If this is what Jesus is here for, and we're supposed to be disciples of his and reflecting him, then that's what we're here for.
Proclaim liberty to the captives. Yeah, year of the Lord's favor.
Yep.
And that's the gospel, right? You do not have to be at war with God. God loves you, and he is here to receive you, and his favor is available through Christ. Amazing, yeah. Okay, so what's next for Mirror Ministries? You guys are working on some big stuff, right? Okay, quick story. So my daughter's here kind of as our producer for today. So anyway, she was so you guys called me up and you said, hey, we want a tract of land, but it's got to get approved by the commission of whatever over there in the city. And the way I remember the story, I don't know, I've got fond memories of this night, so maybe this is just me, but the way I remember it was you basically said to me in your own very nice and diplomatic way, hey, we need to be nice and classy at this thing when we make our appeal. Can you show up and say all the stuff we want to say? So I said, yeah, sure. So we show up and the neighbors are there, and it was a really tense scene because the room was packed. We were sitting on the floor. And the neighbors of the tract of land that you guys wanted for a project, I'm assuming you'll tell us about in a minute, they didn't want it because they didn't want, quote, those kinds of people in the neighborhood, right? And there was one neighbor that got up and said, listen, actually, I just did my PhD work on sex trafficking, and I'm telling you, this is not a problem. Your land value, your precious land values aren't going to be affected the way you think they are. This isn't going to bring danger to your community the way you think it is. It's fine. But she was the only one, and everybody else was like, boo. And really, it was, it was, I think they hid behind the cloak of, we want our kids to be able to play outside in the yard. But really, they were worried about money. It was the economics of it, right? And so, you got up and gave, everybody had whatever it was, 4 minutes or something. And you got up and just gave this beautiful, full of the love of Christ appeal to help these girls. We have to help these girls. I got to come in and say the rest of the stuff, which was fun for me. But I mean, it was like the news cameras were there, and it was like a community wide thing. And it ended up, maybe, I think, if I understand right, by a narrow margin, getting approved. You guys got the permission for it.
That land was not approved.
What?
That piece was not approved. So
you got a different piece.
We got a different piece of property.
Okay, tell me the story and then tell me the project you're doing with it.
Yeah, different piece of land because that one was not approved.
Knuckleheads. You don't have to agree with that on microphone. It's okay. I'll go ahead and take that one.
Let's
Knuckleheads.
just say, let's remember to be praying for our government officials. And if you want to get, politically involved, your local government has a lot of power because they do get to approve or disapprove these different things.
Yeah.
So
pray for those knuckleheads. All right, I'll stop. Continue. What are we working on here?
We did elect them. So who's the knuckleheads, right?
Point received.
So that didn't stop us because God said, and that was the first vision God gave us, was for a restoration home for minor girls. Because when we started looking at the problem and asking them, what's going on? Where can we help? What we saw was there was a lot of awareness out there. There was a lot of education out there. So a lot more girls at that point, we were really seeing the girls, a lot more girls being rescued, but they kept ending up back in the hands of traffickers again. So they'd get rescued and sent home, or rescued and sent to a foster home, or rescued and sent to wherever it might be, but nobody had the resources to help them get through the trauma they'd been through and get free. They either ended up back in the hands of the same trafficker or just a whole nother one. Because of the trauma inundation that had been, done to them.
Yeah.
So what we really needed was some restoration homes. Well, nationwide, we had just a handful of restoration homes that have about 6 kids in them each. And our government will tell you that they figure there's over 100,000 kids being trafficked each year in the United States.
Wow.
That's domestically, right?
Yeah.
Not kids brought in or brought out or whatever. And once again, it's probably a low estimate. So he gave us this vision of a restoration home for minor girls here in the Tri-Cities. We argued with him because, God, this is going to be expensive. God, this is going to be so much red tape. God, this is going to be really difficult because we have to work with all these different licensing and all this kind of stuff. Well, he said, you know what? I'm God. Should be enough of an answer. I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I parted the Red Sea. I can part the red tape. And he's shown us this again and again.
That's going to wind up in one of my sermons.
Well, we do have a good story of that. He did literally part the red tape for us at the very beginning when we became Mirror Ministries. So, and that we claim that as a bigger mirror. We claim that as a bigger miracle than the parting of the Red Sea because it was the IRS.
Yeah, and anybody can move water, but have you tried to move a government?
That's right. So we claimed that as our biggest miracle from the beginning, and he just shows us one after the other. So that first property was put down. Somebody else got to purchase it, but we found another property, got the approval. The Planning Commission this time actually was a unanimous approval, so that was awesome.
All right. The
Board of Commissioners, we got a 2 out of 3 vote.
I just want to say we elected them, so we should get full credit for that.
There you go.
I'm messing with you. Sorry, go ahead.
We're not knuckleheads.
I'm righteous. I'm righteous.
And through Christ. So we have property, and we purchased the property. So we now have land in Franklin County.
All right.
It has a home on it that we will be remodeling. It has a big building on it that'll be a multi-purpose activity center where they'll have their study room, counseling area, arts and crafts area, and a great big indoor activity area. We'll have the horses for equine therapy. There's pasture and barn out there.
That is such a cool thing.
And we have 20 acres, so we need some help with people that are interested in landscape kind of stuff. We need help from people that maybe want to do land management. We're looking, preferably some volunteers and pro bono services, but we're also, just those experts. So we've had some awesome farmer friends out there helping us out with things and making decisions. But there's just a lot of need out there for, and what we're continuing to do, we'll continue to have the Mayor Ministries Outreach Center in Kennewick too, because we need to have something in town where we're, through that and through the outreach we're doing, we saw 64 people come to freedom last year.
Wow.
In the Tri-Cities. So that's, people look at these things overseas and they're like, 4 girls rescued in such and such country. And it's like, okay, but we see that every month here in the Tri-Cities.
You said 64 last year.
64 girls. Well, I shouldn't say girls, 64 people, girls and guys, rescued from, we don't rescue them. We offer them rescue. We offer them freedom. We bring that hope. Yeah. Law enforcement rescues. Jesus rescues. We offer and point to that freedom and hope. But 64 more this last year. It's not a small thing that's happening out there. So we'll still need to continue our community-based outreach and have our restoration home as well. So,
and I think that's so cool, the work that you guys do with people in-house. I mean, like, for example, I never knew about art therapy.
Yeah.
Right. But the first time that I kind of intersected with the sex trafficking world in ministry, we kind of, and I called you up and said, I think we just stumbled on an underage brothel. Help! And you walked us through the whole thing, right? But when we first figured out what was going on there, we just got some of those girls out of there, and a couple of them, like, we could get them back to their families, which was great because they had actually been, kind of kidnapped, whatever. They got tricked into this thing, and then they found themselves stuck in this world. You remember the deal. So we could get them back to their families, but they were in my living room for a little while because it was like we had to drive to Idaho and Oregon and whatever, and I couldn't drive them there alone. So it was the middle of the night, and I had to call up, I called up a guy that I was discipling. I said, hey, you want to go and help with something? He said, sure. What are we doing? I said, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to pick you up in 20 minutes. So I leave these girls home with my wife and the kids and whatever. I go pick up the guy, and when I get back, they were coloring, and these girls were 17 and 19, I think, and they were coloring kids' coloring books. And I just thought to at the time, I thought, wow, that's really sad. That's where they're at emotionally. Like their development and maturity never got past coloring book level. But that's not really what was going on. There's like, you can describe it obviously better than I can, but it was basically art therapy, right? They felt better in doing that. So why is that such an effective thing?
Well, once again, we're made in the image of God, right? And He is the creator, so He made us creative. But also, what I've noted on the survivors we work with is the ones who have survived to get help all seem to be extremely creative. Music, art, whatever it might be. It's another way of disassociating from what's happening to you. So the things that are happening to you physically in reality are really almost impossible to bear. So how do you disassociate from that and do something else? So you use that creative side of your brain a lot more. The creative side of the brain is the opposite hemisphere of the dealing with it memories portion of the brain. So those are really technical terms.
Well, yeah, but you've got the experiential side of things processing, and then you've got we do have imagination and fantasy where we want to play, and that's how a lot of people use drugs, is to try and force their brain to escape into the something other than reality, the alternate reality, right? But if you can do that through a creative outlet, then how much better, right? Obviously.
So there's official art therapy, and then there's just the fact that art or music, anything creative like that, is therapeutic.
Okay.
It's kind of like there's official equine therapy or horse therapy that we're going to be doing, right? There's also the fact that snuggling up to a horse or riding a horse can be very therapeutic in itself. There's pet therapy, and there's the fact that having a dog to sit and talk to is therapeutic.
So why horses? That seems like the most expensive option.
Yeah, we just had that discussion. You sound like my husband. Horses are some way that you process hay into manure in a really expensive manner.
Maybe we could use a goldfish or a gerbil.
That's right. Yeah. Horses are actually very intuitive to emotions, and so you have to learn to identify your own emotions and control your own emotions as you're dealing with a horse. So when they deal with the mental health equine therapy, the horse actually is doing a whole lot of the therapeutic care. And then of course there's just that if you're a horse lover, if you're not, if you're a horse lover, you understand too that there's something about that relationship with a horse to be able to go out, and maybe it's a dog in your mind that you can sit and talk to. I know for me growing up, it was a dog I could sit and talk with. they're very non-judgmental, so it's nice.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a dog disapprove of me before. Yeah. So, okay, what do you guys need then? I mean, if somebody's listening to this and saying, I would love to get involved and help, what are the on-ramps? What can they do? What do you need people to do? What's the connection?
Well, right now we have a lot of big financial needs, right? Every agency, every ministry. So regular giving or major gifts are always needed.
Well, and you explained it to me one time that the regular gifts are super helpful, even if they're small, because it allows you to plan.
Exactly. Yeah. We can build a budget off of knowing how much is supposed to be coming in every month.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful.
Yep.
So we need more staff. So if you know people who are Christians, strong in their faith and really wanting to work with that faith, we're looking for things. We're looking for another advocate who goes and does that outreach and that casework. It's a complex job. We're looking for a clinical supervisor, donor development, and quite a few other positions. So yeah, if there's something you're interested in there, follow us on social media and share things so that you learn more and help others be more aware of what's going on in the Tri-Cities and things that you can do about it. Invite us to come do presentations and trainings at your workplace, schools, teams, neighborhoods, churches, youth groups. We do trainings from preschool on up.
Yeah, and I was thinking about getting into this today, but this might be better to just do a second episode, maybe. And we're about to wrap up season 1, so maybe in season 2, we'll have a conversation about preparing people to recognize and engage when they see stuff. I mean, if somebody's in middle school and they go and they see their friend showing signs of concern, like, hey, I think something's going on there. How do you recognize it? What do you do? How do you jump in and help? Right. So I'd love to get you talking about that. So while we're on recording here, I'm going to make you commit to come back and do a second episode.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The more people that know, the less people that get exploited. And we would love to work ourselves out of business. But back to scripture, Revelation talks about the cargoes of human flesh coming through at the end of time. So I don't think we're going to see the end of this until Christ comes back.
We got a lot of work to do. And I don't know when he's coming back. May it be soon, but we got a lot of work to do until then.
That's right.
Well, so listen, we've got a couple of shout outs here just as far as places to go for more information. You said social media. I mean, where can they find you on social media?
Mirror-Ministries. And that should pop us up.
Okay,
but, yeah.
Great.
And our website is mirror-ministries.org. Yeah. I say hyphen because I'm old. Some of you say dash. So mirror-ministries.org.
Yeah, mirror-ministries.org. And then there's also a 24-hour call or text survivor services line. And so I just want to throw this number out here, which I should have done at the beginning during the dedication. But 509-212-9995. So that's survivor services 24/7. Call or text 509-212-9995. And you'll get, one of a couple of excellent ladies down there that are able and equipped to jump in and help. So, yeah, Tricia, listen, I feel like I could talk to you all day. There's so much to go over here, and it's such a hidden world that you're involved in. But I'm really, really happy that you're out there and leading the charge, and the organization that you lead. And I mean, you're doing a great job, by the way, just for what it's worth. I don't know what it takes to do your job, but I know what it looks like when a job is not being well done versus when somebody's being effective for the Lord. And it's one of those things where sometimes when God's using people, it's just obvious that like when Moses' face glowed coming off of the mountain, you could look at him and be like, that guy was just with the Lord. And when a ministry is getting the work of God done, there's a certain glow that happens, and it's just dripping off of you guys. So I'm really, really thankful that you're out there and the work that you do, personally, organizationally, and all of that. You guys are a massive blessing. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here to talk about some of this. I mean, it's probably not uncomfortable for you anymore because this is the world that that you live in. But honestly, these are uncomfortable conversations for people to have to get exposed to. And listen, guys, if you are aware of a situation where that you're concerned about, or you don't know what you're looking at, or it might be trafficking, it might not, but whatever, then just reach out to Mirror Ministries, because they, trust me, I tell you this from experience, they will walk you through what to do next and then tell you when to hand it off and when to let the professionals get in there, because this is a go-to move for me. So Tricia, thank you so much again. Would you mind if I pray for you before we get done? All right, let's do it. God, thank you for not leaving evil to win. You have so many people that have heard your voice clearly, that know what you want to see happen, or maybe don't know a whole lot, but you've told them just enough to take the next step. And I thank you for putting your kids into action. I thank you for Tricia. I thank you for Mirror Ministries. I understand she called herself one of the co-founders. I don't know who the other co-founders were, but I'm thankful for all of them. And I just ask for greater effectiveness. I ask that you would, she didn't ask me to say this. I asked that you would entrust them with a ton of resources and put them in their, put the money, the time, the land, the space, the horses, whatever it is in their hands, and then make them the kind of organization, or continue to make them the kind of organization that handles that faithfully, for the sake of you being known accurately as you actually are, and for your salvation being brought to people who need it in the moment, who need you to show up just to survive. There's a lot of those situations where if you don't do something, then somebody's going to die, or somebody will not. I mean, save us and we will be saved. And if you don't save people, there's nobody else to do it. And so I just ask that you would send in more of your servants and grow Mirror Ministry so that they can so that they would look back fondly on the day when, the days when, you remember when we only had 64 people rescued in a year and we thought that was massive. I just pray that would be, that would be a cute memory for them because of what you do through them and organizations like them. And I pray all this in Jesus' name and under his blood. Amen.
Amen.
All right, guys, listen, the world is a messed up place, but we have a gospel that is perfectly suited to fix it. So have that nimble on your lips, and we will see you on episode 19.
Hungry for Wisdom is a ministry of Grace and Truth Community in West Richland, Washington. You can find out more about us on our app, social media, or at graceandtruthcommunity.com. We love him because he first loved us.